If you're looking to set up your LLC, but you have lingering doubts on mistakes or issues or things that you just don't know, we're going to cover everything in this tutorial. This is like an ultimate guide. We're just throwing it all at you in one video. And what we're going to be doing is working through a LLC setup and survival flowchart. So what you can see here is this flowchart. It has 21 different steps to it, and each one of them are items that you may want to consider for not only just setting up your LLC, but making sure that it stays compliant, and then also making sure that you're checking all the boxes for everything you need to do. So you may not be familiar with terms such as commingling funds, piercing the corporate veil, registered agents. All of these types of things we're going to explain in this video, and we're going to start walking you through this right now in this detailed guide. And I believe I mentioned it before, you can get this Notion doc for free. There is a link in the description below that you can download this doc for yourself. And this is really handy because you're going to see this embedded flow chart here. It's kind of like a decision tree. And then there's going to be these drop-down buttons that coordinate with things. So for example, the first step really is, do you actually have a business name in mind? Well, if you don't have a business name in mind and you click no here, you can go to this prompt number 1. It says copy our prompt into the AI chat agent. So what you can see here is you can do this drop down right here. You can copy and paste this prompt, and we actually have a chat agent built into this. And then all you have to do is insert type of business, and then insert your pain points, customer pain points, and then insert things that are different about your business. And this will actually help you brainstorm up a name for your business. So that is how this tool works right here. And then also on this is a progress tracker. So if you're a little bit overwhelmed by everything you need to do, once you finish with the choosing a business name, you can move that over and have that done. What I would recommend though is when you get this doc for yourself, in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see these 3 dots. You can actually make a copy of this for yourself. And you do that by clicking the duplicate button, and then you can mess around with that duplicate version of it. So why don't we go through this and start getting past the name prompt. So let's assume you have a name for your LLC. Well, you're going to want to use a name checker tool below. So that's prompt number 2. There's different services out there, but why don't we actually go through a hypothetical? Let's say you were setting up a coffee shop in New York State, all right? What you'd want to do is if you're not going through any of the online LLC services, you'd always just Google your New York State LLC. The first thing that's going to show up past the ads is going to be the .gov website. If you want to go directly through the state's website, you always want to make sure that you're on a .gov website here, and then you can form your limited liability. But when it comes to a name, let's say that we've brainstormed names. We've decided on a coffee shop, and the theme of it is that it is quick, it's fast, right? So it's called the Espresso, all right? So what you can do is you can also Google things and say New York State entity database. So whatever state that you're forming your LLC in, you'll be able to do this as well. And then you can click on here. And it's typically going to look something kind of similar to this. So why don't we say we're going to search by entity name. And then you might want to search it for limited liability company, search the database. So what you're looking for when you're searching these databases is to see that there were no entities found. Now, if you search something that had a common name, let's say, the Buffalo Bills, and I'm going to do all these names here. What you're going to see is there's going to be names that'll pop up in New York State because of these different entities that have been started and are active. So when you see things popping up, that means that name may already be taken. If you do go with the online LLC services out there, most of them will do this for you for free as far as the entity search of the name. So do you know the next step then, once you have checked to make sure that that name is available, is you want to go down here and do you know the total cost in your state to form your LLC? There will also be a link in the description below that'll take you to a cost calculator that we have. I'm going to blur out the names of the different service providers, but again, what you can do here is you can select your state. Let's say we're talking about Colorado, and it will show you the 1-year and 5-year total cost of the top 4 online LLC services out there. So if you do decide to go that route, that's what your cost would be. Most of these services now start at $0 plus state fee. That's why we're seeing less and less people going directly through the state website, because they like having a place that you can manage and organize your LLC through these online tools. One of the advantages of going with an online tool is that they will give you notifications of when your LLC needs to be renewed, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then they also are a way that you can have LLCs in multiple different states in one dashboard, because As your business grows, you may end up having domestic and foreign LLCs, and all of these things we're going to discuss later in the video. But I think right now, before we get into the next section here of do you have a registered agent, why don't we talk about like what a registered agent is and how it impacts your LLC. So what I've found from talking to people is they get an LLC set up, but they don't always have a good understanding of exactly what it does for them. Some people think that there's tax advantages to the LLC. It is not. It is simply a limited liability company. So what it does is it limits your liability. At the beginning of the video, we talked about piercing the corporate veil. So in the example of a coffee shop, the LLC creates a corporate veil, a division between your business and personal assets. So the reason that you'd want that corporate veil is if somebody gets injured at your coffee shop, let's say they slip and fall and they want to sue your business. When you have the LLC set up correctly, they can sue you for your business assets, but they can't come after your personal assets. The attorney, if they hire one that is going to sue you, is going to try to find cracks in your LLC. And if they find them, they may be able to get a judge to agree to pierce the corporate veil. What that would mean is that somebody could come after your business and personal assets. So one of the ways that people do this is they have a third-party registered agent service. What that service does is they will deliver service of process notice. So if you're being sued, they make sure that you're showing up to court, you have the right documents and documentation that you need. And a lot of people will hire out a professional third party to do that. Another reason why you'd want a registered agent is it's actually legally required to have one in the state that you exist with your LLC. So let's say like you're like, oh, I'm going to have my uncle do it and he's in Pennsylvania, but this is a New York State LLC. In that example, that is something that is illegal. You can't have a registered agent outside of the state. They must have a physical mailing address within the state, not a PO box. So then once you have your registered agent figured out, you can do it yourself if you want. The downside to that is these state database searches. When I look on this and I look at Buffalo Bills Alumni Foundation and I click on here, I'm actually going to be able to see a lot of different information. Like I see the address here. A lot of times too, you're going to see the registered agent. Let me see if it shows on this one. Registered agent name and address. They don't have one for this particular one, probably because it's not an LLC. It's a nonprofit corporation. But that's where you'd also see the address, the name and address of the registered agent. So when you use a third-party service, what it does is it helps to give you a little bit more privacy because your information wouldn't be showing up in these public databases. So once you have gone through the process, what you're going to do is you're actually going to form what's called your articles of organization. So why don't we take a look at what this looks like in this particular section here. Most of these you're going to be able to file online. The articles of organization are not too complex, especially if you're a solopreneur. You're going to be filing a single member LLC. So where this gets complicated is if you're not applying as the owner and you're applying on behalf of another person, because you can be a single member LLC, but it can also be a member managed LLC where there's like actually a management company that owns it. So I'm going to apply online as owner here just to kind of be able to go over a few things. So here is what the articles of organization look like in New York State. They look very similar in other states as well. And it starts with the name of the limited liability company that we've also confirmed is available within the state, the county within the state that it's going to be set up. The Secretary of State is designated as an agent of the limited liability company. In New York State, they call it the Secretary of State is designated as agent of the limited liability company. So that's another way of saying registered agent. It goes by different names that we can put on the screen right now. It depends on the state that you're in. But you can see that this is actually a pretty simple process because you're doing a signature and then you're printing. And then simply you're putting your name and mailing address on here. And you're also going to include, if you were to be doing snail mail, a check with this that you would include with New York State. Now, one of the things too that's cool about this is when you use this LLC cost calculator here, it'll tell you when you look at state fees, what the state filing fee is here. And it'll also get into annual and biannual fees with the state, depending on what state you're going through. But just know that every state has a filing fee. Some of them are more expensive if you're going to like Massachusetts, California. Something like Colorado, I believe, is closer to like $50. It really just depends on the state that you're in. So the actual filing of the LLC is not that difficult. What I will say is that some states have different requirements. Like New York State's a weird one where they actually require you to publish in a public news newspaper, like I think it's like 6 weeks, about this new LLC. It's a very archaic rule that they have. Other states also require you to have an operating agreement, but we will be getting to the additional requirements as well. Why don't we go down here and then talk about the steps you should take after LLC formation. So have you obtained the proper licenses and permits? This is a really big one. So in the coffee shop example, if you're serving food to the public, you're probably going to need licenses and permits, and they may happen on the state level, the county, or even town level. The way that you can do this is, if you haven't done this yet, you can research this on your own. We would go to step number 6 below. So why don't we open up step 6, and then I'm going to copy and paste this. We're going to put it into the chatbot. So here you can see that we're giving it a little context about the business and the location. And then the chatbot is going to be able to search the internet and give you an idea of what particular licenses and permits may be needed for this type of business. Now, if you want, there's also online services that will do this for a fee, but this is going to help get you up and running as far as initial research. So then let's say that you apply for the proper licenses and permits and you get those set up, so your business is going to get shut down. Because I mean, if you don't have a license or permit to serve food and the health inspector finds out, they will shut your business down and it's going to be difficult to get it back open. Now, have you set up an EIN yet? An EIN is employer identification number. It's like a social security number for your business. It's used by the IRS to identify your business. This is something that you can actually set up pretty easily. So you can go to the IRS website or pay a service to do this. If you go to drop down number 7, you'll see the link right here, and you can work through this on your own. Or, like I said, online LLC services can do this for you as well. But you can just apply for an EIN from this page on the IRS website. Now, you're going to need that EIN if you're ever setting up payroll. A lot of times you're setting up business banking, they want to see an EIN. It's something that legitimizes your business, especially if you're like going to need funding and you're looking to get loans and things of that nature. So then once you have your EIN set up, you're going to want to consider, do you have a dedicated business bank account? At the beginning of the video, we talked about a term called commingling funds. This is really important. As soon as you set up your LLC, you want to get that business bank account set up right away. That's because in the example of somebody suing you as the coffee shop owner, if the attorney suing you finds out that you've been running the business through your personal checking account and you're commingling those funds with your personal and business checking, that is a crack in your LLC, and a judge may grant them permission to pierce the corporate veil and come after your business and personal assets, which basically means that your LLC is not effective. It's null and void. It's doing nothing for you. So that's why you want to get a business bank account set up right away. The other piece of that, though, is that when it comes to taxes and accounting and bookkeeping, everything becomes a lot easier when you have everything separated into a business bank account, because you know all those expenses and all those incomes coming in all are related to the business, and it becomes a lot easier. Next, do you have an operating agreement? So I've actually spoken to attorneys about this because I wanted their take on, would you create an operating agreement with AI? And what I've overwhelmingly heard is, if it is a single member LLC and you're on this business by yourself, that is not a bad option, because an operating agreement is stating who the members are, what are their ownership percentages, what happens if you dissolve the LLC, all of these types of things. Now, it doesn't really matter as much in terms of like a single member LLC, because you're not going to get into a fight with yourself about dissolving the business. But whenever you have a partner, that's where things can get really tricky. And that's because, let's say they went out of the business before you do. Well, what do you sell the business off at? What valuation to them? That's when attorneys start getting involved. Things get messy and very expensive. So my recommendation is, if you do have a partner or it's a more complex business, you may want to hire an attorney to draft up an operating agreement for your business. But in my opinion, you can probably get away with just using AI to create that operating agreement if you're a single member LLC. Now, have you researched and fulfilled all state LLC requirements? So we're going to go down to section 10 here. And again, this is just a little copy paste. I'm going to show you how this works. So as I mentioned before earlier, we talked about a publication requirement. So this is where it's talking about the publication requirement, the operating agreement, registered agent, the fact that New York State is biennial in terms of having to renew every 2 years. So this gives you a lot of helpful information on what you need to do as far as additional requirements after setting up your LLC. The reason that I created it this way is I wanted to be able to have a resource that works for everybody, because there's 50 different states, and you may be, looking at a very different situation in Texas versus Florida versus California, New York State or wherever you may be setting up your LLC. All right, next we're going to go to, do you have taxable goods or services and have you set up sales tax? Super important. This is a huge issue that a lot of people fall into. Is they might be selling physical products. They never set up sales tax with the state. And then when it comes to taxes, they say, hey, you sold $100,000 worth of goods that you never charged sales tax for. You're going to pay the state that, and you're going to pay a fine or fee on top. What those fines and fees are going to depend on the state and the situation, but you want to make sure that you're setting that up. So again, this is something that you go through your state website. If you go to spot number 11 here, you can get a little bit more context for your state on how you'd go about doing that. But typically it's on the .gov website is where you can apply for setting up sales tax for your business. Have you researched if you need a foreign LLC yet? I'm going to say no on this because in this hypothetical, this is just really good to understand what a foreign LLC is. So why don't we do that right now in the video so we can explain this a little bit. And we'll stick with New York State just because I want to be congruent with the rest of the video. So basically what it's highlighting here is what a foreign LLC does. Now, this is a video, so I'm not going to read this to you step by step, but you can get all the information here. But this is important because when you have a coffee shop, let's say you start one in New York State and then you expand and then you start having employees that are working in Pennsylvania, or maybe you have a warehouse in Pennsylvania. When you have different equipment, buildings, and employees in different states, you're going to have to set up what's called a foreign LLC in those states. It kind of exists alongside of your main domestic LLC that is within the state that you set up originally. That is something I just want you to be aware of when you're thinking about potentially expanding into another state, or if you're thinking about like, oh, I'm going to get cute and I'm going to set up a Delaware LLC for this New York State coffee shop. Because again, talking to an attorney, like what his recommendation was with that is New York State is going to want their money one way or the other eventually. And he had a client that did this where they had a bunch of gas stations in New York State and they set them up through Delaware, and they actually had to break down all those LLCs and rebuild them in New York State and pay back, not back taxes, but fees based on what they should have been paying all along for that. And he basically said it ended up becoming a huge mess and trying to untangle all of this because the person set it up in Delaware instead of actually New York State where the physical business was happening. All right, next up, have you researched any local taxes that may be required? So I won't go into this one in detail, but you can see here it says, can you explain things like business privilege tax or gross receipt tax and where I should follow up to see if these are applicable for my business? So that's what you're going to want to look into on that section of the flowchart. All right, next, we're going to go to, have you looked into business insurance? So for business insurance, like the way you can think about it is the LLC is just the entity that creates a little bit of separation between your business and personal assets. The business insurance is like, let's say you get sued, somebody got injured, they slip and fell, and they hurt their hip, it's a bad injury, and they're trying to sue for $300,000 of damages for their health bills. Is your business going to be able to pay that out? Probably not, especially in the early stages of it. So your business insurance is going to be able to pay that out. Sometimes business insurance, depending on the type of business, may be required. And especially if you're like renting out a space, they're going to want to know that you have business insurance, that you're covered, and that you're checking all these different boxes. So you definitely want to check out business insurance. In the prompt below in the chatbot, I do have recommendations for that. I recommend you going through a broker or an aggregator service, which can pull in a bunch of different quotes. And you want to be able to go through and figure out what type of insurance you're going to want for your specific business. So you can use that with the chatbot as well. Have you set up books for accurate accounting? On here, I said get QuickBooks or other software. I mentioned QuickBooks because I went through an issue myself. I ended up using a bookkeeping service called Bench Accounting, and it was like a proprietary closed system. So it was like, hey, this is our own thing. Nobody else can get in here. It's hard for my accountant to actually get in there and look at my books. And they ended up closing up their doors and then selling to somebody else. And it was this big mess. And I had to kind of revamp all of my books. And it was a huge headache in 2024 for me. And what I came to from working with the new CPA is they said, go with QuickBooks. QuickBooks is the answer because A, it has mass adoption, like 80% of CPAs and tax filers use QuickBooks. And then on top of that, it's an open system, meaning like my CPA or tax filer can easily get in there. And if I switch from one bookkeeping service to a different bookkeeping service, then it's going to be able to travel with me with that information. With Bench, it was very difficult to get that information out of their service. So my recommendation, if you want just simplicity, is going with QuickBooks Online. But you know, it's up to you if you want to go with a different service. But again, get that set up early, because if you don't, and then all of a sudden you're trying to go back 9 months ago and like look at expenses and figuring out what they are, taxes are going to be a nightmare for you. Another recommendation I have for that, I'm going to search it really quick. You can do QuickBooks Advisors, and I forget what they call it. It's find an accountant near you, and then find a pro advisor. So you can put in your location. So I'm going to stick with Orchard Park, where the home of the Buffalo Bills are. And then select services, and I'm looking for accounting and then bookkeeping. All right. And then you can also, so now what I see is 32 results, but this is cool because you can see that some of these people offer free consultations, and then you can see reviews on them, what they offer. You don't have to use somebody local to you, but if this is the route you want to go, you can go this route to find people who offer you a free consultation and help you give more insights. Again, I would just do your research before you go in, have a good understanding of what you're looking for, and don't feel stupid. Like, you're not supposed to have all these answers. They're going to have questions for you and help you, advise you on setting up your bookkeeping. Do you understand and pay quarterly estimated taxes? You can't see the taxes got cut off here. So this is number 16. You can copy and paste the prompt in here. But really, I can just explain this to you right now. Once your business starts making $1,000 of net income per year, most states are going to want you to file, and along with the IRS on the federal level, quarterly estimated taxes. And now these are typically paid out on April 15th, June 15th, September 15th, around those dates, and then January 15th. Doesn't really make sense because you would think it'd be like every 3 months because there's 12 months. There's kind of a gap there. But the reason they do this is they realize a lot of business owners aren't going to be good at accounting for the taxes that they're going to need to pay at the end of the year. Because when you're an employee, those taxes are already coming out of your payroll. Like, you're not even seeing it, that money. That's why, you're like, oh, I make $1,000 a week. It turns out I actually make like $750 a week, right? Those taxes are being taken out. But when you're taking income on as the business, they want you to pay those estimated taxes quarterly. Again, if you don't do this, a lot of states can go back and get that money from you anyways, and then make you pay a fine or a fee on top of that as well. And it's just easier when you're paying it quarterly because you know that you're not digging yourself a hole and going to be owing a lot of taxes at the end of the year. Do you know the issues around misclassifying workers? I'm going to explain this one to you. And basically what it is the difference between a W-2 and a 1099. W-2 is your classic employee. They are somebody that you can tell them where to be, when to be. They're like, you are my employee, I own you. Those are not great words, but you get the idea. Like, you have a lot more ownership when it's an employee. Now, when you hire contractors, the taxes are handled differently. A lot of times the contractor is the one that are handling their own taxes. So it can be a little bit of a tax savings to the business owner when you're hiring a 1099 contractor. But when you misclassify them, that creates a huge issue. Let's say there's somebody who's really acting like an employee, like they work in your actual coffee shop, they're serving coffees, they have a schedule, all these types of things. And then you fire that employee, but you're paying them as a contractor. So they're going to start talking to somebody, or they get their tax bill at the end of the year and they're like, oh my gosh, I owe so much in taxes. And somebody else says, hey, they misclassified you. Like, you should go to the state on this. So what's going to happen is you're probably going to have to pay back taxes for what they paid. You may actually have to pay them something because you're going to go to court. That's up to the judge to determine that. But it creates this huge mess. And this is a very, very common issue with new business owners. And that's when they classify somebody as a contractor when they're truly an employee. So if you go to the chat prompt, it'll help you figure out whether or not that person is an employee, because there's different questions that you can ask yourself in terms of, do they pass that test of if this is a contractor or employee. So then from number 17 here, we can go, are you aware of the annual LLC requirements in your state? So that's another one. You can copy the prompt here. The prompt is just saying, I'm in this state. I want to know what annual requirements are due. The other thing you can do here is, again, going back to this calculator that we have here. And in New York, what you're going to find is there's a biennial fee. That means every 2 years, you have to renew your LLC with the state, and it's going to cost $9 for that fee. Now, if I go to a different state here, why don't we go to, let's say, Colorado. Colorado, you can see there's an annual fee of $10, and there's like a one-page piece of paper that you have to like essentially renew your LLC to keep it in good compliance. Where you will see this, when we go back here, you can see inactive, right? Or it might say not valid. When you don't renew that LLC, it's inactive, and it no longer protects your business in any way because you didn't file that renewal. So that's a big one too, is that person gets hurt, that judge or the attorney that's suing you. That's the first thing they're going to look for, is to see if your LLC is even active. So you want to make sure that you're renewing it each year. And one thing to know is that some states, like you see Arizona, you don't see it. That's because they don't require in that state to renew your LLC. Now, do you know when you should elect S Corp tax classification? Now, yes, you can copy and paste the prompt here in 19 to get that information, but I'm giving it to you because you came here for a video. What that is you can set up your LLC and then you can elect to be taxed as an S corporation. Typically, people do this when you start to make about $40,000 to $50,000 of net income per year. That is net income. The reason that number gets thrown around a lot is because there are some expenses related to filing as an S corporation, because an LLC is a pass-through taxation entity. That means that the money that comes through the LLC passes through or flows through to your personal tax return. So you're not filing a separate tax return for that LLC. When you elect to be taxed as an S corporation, you are now filing a separate return. And it creates extra cost in terms of like if you're hiring somebody to do that filing for you. Also, what you need to do when you're doing this is you need to be on payroll. The reason for that is you're required to be on payroll and you have to pay yourself a reasonable salary if you're being elected to be taxed as an S corporation. What that reasonable salary is depends on what you'd have to pay somebody to do that job. If you're working at the coffee shop and you're kind of acting like a manager of that coffee shop, how much would you pay a manager to do that job? They don't want to see that you're paying yourself like $10,000 a year. They want it to be a reasonable salary. Why would you do all this? Well, to save money on taxes. There's what's called self-employment taxes. So the self-employment taxes are for things like Social Security and Medicare, the FICA type taxes, and it's 15.3% that you're paying on that. When you're an employee, you're paying half of that and the business is paying the other half. So what happens with an S corporation is that you don't pay that 15.3% on distributions. Now, I'll explain what that means. So let's say that you pay yourself a $45,000 salary, and then you have money left over and you give yourself a $30,000 distribution or dividend from the S Corp. That $30,000 is not going to be subject to the self-employment taxes, which is 15.3%. So if my math is right, that would save you a little over $4,500 a year in taxes on the $30,000 of distributions. So that is something that there's more complexity to it, and you're probably not there right now if you're just setting up your LLC. And I highly recommend talking to your CPA and getting advice on how to handle that. But that is something that down the road, I don't want you to realize like, oh my gosh, I've been overpaying on taxes because I never elected to be taxed as an S corporation. All right, do you have clear contracts or written agreements with your contractors, employees? This is another big one. Like I've seen this a lot in the service-based industries. Somebody comes out, they do a bunch of work. I actually knew somebody in high school who would do like high-end AV equipment installs. He did an install for a Buffalo Bill. It was like a $30,000 job and he never had a contract written up and the guy never paid him. And I know that's terrible, but it's really hard to prove that you guys were doing business together when you don't have the proper contracts and agreements. But I just want to make sure that you have clear written agreements with whoever you are doing business with. All right, lastly, have you marked important renewal dates in your calendar? So check out this prompt. This one's really helpful. So all I did is I just added New York State here. And then what this is going to do is it's going to give you a laundry list of important dates. So why don't we take a look at these, because these are things you're going to need to remember. These are your quarterly estimated tax dates that we mentioned earlier. Tax extension filing. So that is due by March 15th for most LLCs. So you can actually get an extension on your taxes if you need to. File W-2 forms for employee by January 31st. So at the beginning of the year, you have to file that W-2 form and provide a copy of that to any employees. And that can include yourself actually if you're on payroll because you set up an S Corp. And then what else do we have? LLC annual report. Due dates vary by state. Check your state-specific deadline. Some states will make it like the first of the year. Others will do it on the actual renewal date. So if you set one up in May 15th, then the next May 15th is when it's due by. Some do it by the beginning of the month of when you get set up. You just have to check your state's website. And then what I would do is also create these recurring calendar reminders for all these dates. Other important dates. Last date to make 401k contributions in your business. I think this is worth talking about. And I know you came here for LLC information, but what I want to do is just plant seeds in your mind of things that you can look at in the future. If you're a business owner, especially if you're a solopreneur, this is really great. You can set up a solo 401k, and that is a great way to save on taxes as well, because you can make pre-tax contributions into your 401k, and the numbers are always climbing on that. It's like I think it's $23,500 in 2025 that you can pay yourself, and then you can also pay a profit share on top of that, which is usually 25%. Now, a cool thing is if you're a solopreneur, you can also hire your spouse and still run a solo 401k if it's just hiring your spouse, and then you can pay your spouse a reasonable salary. Maybe it's like $30,000, but you could have most of that salary wiped out in terms of taxes because all of it is going into your 401k pre-tax. So that is a great way to be able to save on taxes down the line, as well as setting up a 401k for your business. Personally, I don't have any affiliation with them, but I use Charles Schwab for that. I researched a bunch of different options out there. Vanguard had one, but they pulled it down. So just something to be considering down the line. It's a great way to be able to save for retirement. Tax return filing deadline, March 15th for most LLCs. You're thinking like, well, isn't it April 15th? No, that's your personal. If you end up getting set up with an S corporation, it's going to be March 15th. Sales tax deadlines, they vary. Biannual statement with New York State, it's every 2 years. So this is, again, a great resource here for helping you set that up. What I've done for myself is I just created a Google Calendar with all those recurring dates on there so I always see it. The last piece of advice that I want to give you in this video is, yes, this may seem overwhelming. I believe that for a lot of people going with the online LLC services, it's the best route because they start at $0 plus state fee. But more importantly, you can start checking off a bunch of these boxes. You can get your EIN set up. You can get your license and permit research done for you. They can file your annual compliance for your annual report for your LLC, and they'll remind you that it's due. There's a lot of things that those services can do for you. So I will put my recommendation for the best online LLC service in the description below. And then what you'll see on the video here is a review of the top LLC services and what you should consider when you're going that route of using an online LLC service. I'll catch you in the next video.